Good morning. I'm Andrea Fleming, Director of Talent and Workforce Development at NC Tech. Thank you for joining us this morning for the Focus on Talent session on inclusive communications. Our speakers have a lot to cover, so I'm going to jump right in with brief introductions. Our three panelists with us today are Kurt Merriweather. Kurt is a co-founder and VP of Innovation at the Diversity Movement and a certified diversity executive. Kurt works with executive teams and boards to help them link DEI to culture and business outcomes. Before the diversity movement, Kurt was VP of Strategy and Transformation at Walk West, with previous experience at global brands like Discovery, AOL, and Procter & Gamble. His approach to advising clients and developing strategy blends a unique combination of creative thinking and data analysis. Next up is Bob Osmond. Bob is the president of RacePoint Global. Bob has more than 25 years of award-winning and integrated marketing and public relations experience with a range of B2B and consumer brands. Throughout his career, Bob has worked in a variety of technology sectors, from client devices to managed network services, and has supported healthcare technology, mobile and wireless solutions, and multiple software as a service offerings. Today, Bob works with organizations to build compelling and relative narratives to help lead the conversations that matter. He's a certified diversity executive as well, and serves as a media trainer and mentor to CEOs and executives from startups to Fortune 500 companies. And also we have Dana Calder. Dana is a senior VP of People Operations at Spreedly, where she leads all people operations functions. She's also worked as an account manager on new customer acquisition success team, where she was responsible for customer engagement. Prior to Spreedly, she was director at the Iron Yard, an immersive computer programming boot camp where she supported developers in both training and their job searches and built a robust triangle-focused employer advisory board. So I'm really excited to have all three here today. Excited to hear from each of you about being more inclusive in our communications, why it matters, and the impacts it can have. So participants, if you have questions, please use the Q&A features in Zoom, and we'll get to as many as we can towards the end of the session. And with that, I hope I didn't go over my 3 minutes, Kurt. Kurt, the Zoom mic is all yours.
Andrew, thanks so much. And we're grateful for our partnership with NC Tech. And so I'm honored to have both Bob Osmond and Dana Calder join us today. And so what I wanted to do is talk about why inclusive communications is so important. And the reason for that is that we want to create employee-first workplaces. Treating employees like organizations would treat customers. And so what I want to do is show you a framework that we're going to use to guide the conversation today, and share a slide so that we can do that. And then we'll jump straight into the conversation from there. So there are three things, and hopefully my screen will be loading in just a second. Here we are. Okay. So the idea is that we want to create an employee-first workplace using three things. So first is we want to gain buy-in with key stakeholders and speak the language of the stakeholders that we're trying to influence. The second element is to build capacity within the organization. Oftentimes, organizations want to do things a little bit ahead of where they should because they haven't built the internal capacity to be able to take the stands and make the change that they want to make throughout the organization. And then lastly, it's important to share stories at key moments to continue momentum. And so we'll spend a lot of time at the end talking about how organizations can use relevant stories to connect with teams. So this will be a way for us to guide our conversation this morning. And so I want to start with Bob with this idea of why getting buy-in is so important as organizations want to make progress connecting DEI to culture, but ultimately to create an employee-first workplace.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Kurt, and good morning, Kurt and Dana, and to all of you who are joining. Fundamentally, if you don't secure buy-in from the key stakeholders, so from the very top down, you're entering a world rife with risk for lots of reasons. One is on the positive side, you need buy-in in order to get dollars and resources and investment, because most business owners and leaders think about things in terms of opportunity cost as well, right? So, well, if our people are doing this, then there's something else they're not doing. And so the key is to convince them the story right? It's all about storytelling. Convince them that by doing this, the business will benefit. So you got to get that buy-in, and you do that by speaking their language in part. Yes, there's a moral imperative to creating, I think, to creating a more inclusive workplace, but there's a business imperative. And so if you can get them to buy in to that, there's the positive side. And then from a more defensive perspective, by getting buy-in, you avoid the dreaded say-do disconnect. So if you as a comms leader or an HR leader or a business unit leader are trying to do one thing, create an inclusive workplace, give people flexibility, have equity, whatever it is, and the leaders of your business are saying something completely different, then that's going to demotivate and derail whatever it is you're trying to do. So in speaking, I've pulled up some data because in speaking to your leadership, there's tons of research and data about this, but I'm just going to shout out some that I got from some folks that I've done some work with at Accordant Advisors. Their view is, in terms of business outcomes, more diverse, equitable, inclusive workplaces, higher growth, 70% higher growth, 36% better profitability, 75% faster to market. That's just some stats. Now, they say those outcomes are multiplied if you have what's considered to be an inclusive workplace. So your folks are 10 times more likely to want to come to work if they feel that they're in an inclusive workplace. 6+ times more likely to take pride in their work, and 5 times more likely to want to stay longer. So the reason for building a talent-centric workplace, I mean, there are multiple reasons, but the case is clear, but you got to make that case from a business perspective. End of soapbox.
Right. And so there's overwhelming evidence that you just laid out, Bob. One of the things that we often run into when we're talking to folks is, well, that sounds great externally. How do I take advantage of that in my own organization? Because there may be some folks that are skeptical that data will help inside their own organization. And so I know, Dana, that's one of the challenges that you've had to overcome at Spreedly. And so I wanted you to talk about some of the practical things, taking the data that Bob just talked about. How do you give feet to that, if you will, in Spreedly so that you could make your case there?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So when thinking about Bob's data and creating an inclusive workforce and that higher sense of belonging, which is what my employees, who I think of as my customers, they're looking for when they join a workforce. So understanding from my customers, what is it that you want to do while you're here at Spreedly to grow your career? And part of that is understanding their jobs, their responsibilities, and how to set them up for success. And those aspects allow us to connect in with the business to give to other leaders. This is how we grow Spreedly. This is how we grow the business. And some of that looks like training and development and key skills that we know we need to make certain our customers have with our team. So we have a huge presence in Latin America. So what does it look like to ensure that we have employees, our customers, who are bilingual and understand the context and the culture? So this is a business win by making certain that we're connecting in some relative skills that our customers, external customers, feel really supported and connected and see that sense that we understand that we're supporting a global customer base by having a global workforce. So when I'm able to give these examples to other leaders in different departments, when it comes to making key hires, when it comes to thinking about training and development, understanding the business, understanding gaps that we have in terms of business context and knowledge, and making sure that we set people up for success, that creates that level of harmony within the organization where my customers, employees feel like they're seen, they're heard, and we're taking care of them and growing them here while they're at Spreedly. And then our external customers get the benefit of that, of seeing that We understand that there's a key need and connection, and that we recognize that we're not just transacting and supporting customers in the United States, but globally.
And as you were doing that work, how did you deal with any folks that hadn't thought about things that way before, and how did you frame the conversation so that they could see inclusive practices in this light, as opposed to it being the right thing to do from a societal point of view?
Yes, absolutely. So I think a lot of people, leaders and hiring managers and leaders, when we have turnover, when you have churn, you're thinking, I have an impact now. There's a gap in my team, and who is going to fill that? And what did we not do? What did we miss in terms of why this person exited? And so we have a lot of data we collect. We collect that through exit interviews. We collect that through pulse survey and sentiment scores. So I can bring that back to leaders and go, this is what we missed, and this is what we need to make certain we fix in terms of retention, to make certain that we don't have gaps, because we know there's a key cost when we lose people. We have to, go out to market, hire, ramp that person, make certain they understand the business, and then get them successful. That's a lag of about 6 to 9 months before someone is truly contributing. So the best item that we can do is try to make certain that we're thinking about retention and keeping an eye on turnover because of the cost to the business. And so when I can connect that back in terms of what happens when we don't have someone in that seat, what do we lose in terms of that connection to that customer? Where do we see renewals lag because we don't have that person there? So that's part of that partnership of telling that story, talking to my head of sales and going, where are you seeing that? What's that metric look like? And looking at some of the time that it takes to actually close a deal, and who do we have on the team, and connecting that in. So it's stepping outside of people ops sometimes to look and have that connection with other leaders to understand their metrics and connect it back into my metrics.
I love that you said earlier, Dana, you used the word harmony, which is such a great word, but it's not really a soft word, because it really is about how do you connect and have working in harmony the people who need to do the work with the goals of the business. But to that point, like Kurt, you and the diversity movement have been working with companies now for years, helping them make the case, investing in training, investing in knowledge sharing and education. But I know that you've seen companies make a lot of statements, make a lot of promises, but not make a lot of progress. So I'm curious, like, why is that fundamentally? And what do organizations need to do differently? And for those people maybe who are early in the journey, like, how do they proactively get ahead of avoiding that gap between the statements and the progress?
Right. So if we go back in time about 3 years ago, right around George Floyd's murder, there were lots of statements about whether it's support of the Black and African American community, donations and other things, and organizations felt pressure to make change and to create action. And so while that particular issue has subsided, so now that there's distance between the event and today, what we're seeing is that organizations are now turning their attentions to other things, especially because we're in an environment where things are a little bit tough from an economic point of view. And so there's some organizations that have not made as much progress. And so one of the reasons for that is that there was a rush to do things externally because there was some event that happened. And there have been recent campaigns, even in the news, if you look at what's been happening with Anheuser-Busch, where there was a rush to do some things because they wanted to support a community, but they didn't do the upfront work of getting buy-in and building capacity internally. So it's important to start where you are. That's the first thing. Organizations often want to skip steps. It's important not to skip steps and just admit, here's where we are as an organization and here's some things that we need to do. When we think about being inclusive, it should flow from your mission, vision, and values. It's an outgrowth of who you are. It's an outgrowth of your culture. And so when you think about it from that context, then this shouldn't be something that's separate, but it should be something that's integrated into the way that that organization is operating. And so that's really important to understand is first start where you are and don't skip steps in terms of making more progress. It's just like anything else we do. There tends to be a step to build capacity, to build strength before you can really act on what that thing that you're doing, whether it's you're working out or doing something like that. It's important to have that foundational, those pieces that are built. And so it's important first to think about in the context that Dana just mentioned. How do I connect this to a language that people understand inside the organization so we can talk about why it matters from a mission, vision, and values and business objectives and goals point of view? And so the first thing that we see organizations do is focus on hiring. So there's a move to, I want to get more diverse people into the organization. And so doing the right things that you would expect in terms of best practices, whether that's making sure that you're recruiting from different pools of talent, that you've got folks that are reviewing candidates as they come in that come from a diverse perspective so that you're making sure that there's a strong pipeline inside the organization. And so we see a lot of activity around that as well as education. Where I think organizations often miss the mark is that there's an opportunity to engage the people they're bringing into the organization to help them adapt the culture so that it's different after they come in terms of new audiences they can reach out to, new opportunities that they can take advantage of. Dana mentioned it perfectly with Spreedly's growth in Latin America. It's important for them to have employees that are competent understanding the culture because there's a business impact that they can achieve as a result of that. And so that's where organizations are missing the connection point where it's important to build programming around education, but that education needs to drive a conversation. And the reason the conversation needs to happen is that's where transformation occurs in the organization. Whether it's digital transformation or business transformation or something else, the key is to have data that you can extend, that you can then take that data set and then use that as a way to guide what you do next. So it's this constant iteration of what's working and what needs to work, and then being able to do some experiments or some pilots so that when you're ready to take a stand as an organization in an area that you may not have done before, starting smaller, and then once you're able to build more capacity, then you can do more and more and more and more. And so, for example, you wouldn't look at Ben & Jerry's as an organization and say, we want to mirror Ben & Jerry's. Ben & Jerry's organization has been doing this for a very long time in terms of them being very active in terms of cause marketing and the things that they stand for. And that's because that's built into their culture. So it's important to make sure that there's a realistic picture of where you stand before you take a stand for something else. And so that internal work sometimes feels like you're not making as much progress as you want to. But it's important to track using data and insight. Here's what we said we were going to do. Here's what we did. Here's what we need to shift. Here's what we need to change, and do that over a period of time. And when you do that, then you can say, here's our goal. Here's what worked. Here's what didn't work. Here's what we're going to do differently. And you treat this like any other business strategy that you have as an organization. And so I think it's important to use that same kind of rigor when folks are thinking about building capacity, when they're training their entire teams, and not let the fact that sometimes that when we think about DEI, it becomes more of a human issue, and it is, but it's important to understand how the organization should fit their needs, their goals, and their objectives into making sure the employees are treated in the right way and they're treated first. And so there's this connection between content and education and conversation. And so that's why it's so important from an inclusive communications point of view to do this work first before you start having conversations so that you can close the say-do gap, as you pointed out before, Bob. And so what I wanted to get to now is that when we do work with organizations, it's important to roll out education, but it's also important to have conversations and to be transparent in dialogue and to make sure that we're having conversations that are empathetic with the folks that we're trying to reach. And so as Spreedly has done this work by thinking about education, but also conversation and listening in that process as an organization, there's an opportunity to create impact there. And so how did you do that, Dana, as you were thinking about what areas to engage Spreedly in and how you can start to engage employees in a really powerful way?
Sure. So when we think about transformation and change, Bob mentioned storytelling. That was a key piece for us when we looked at running a monthly series focused on particular calendar events. So what did it look like to bring someone in to talk during Black History Month or LGBTQIA Month, Women's History Month, and having individuals come in and speak allowed our employees to hear from someone else, who may either have lived that experience or has deep subject matter expertise in that area, to do that level of storytelling. So when we think about things like gender expansive communications and understanding different types of gender and what does it look like in terms of a gender spectrum, having someone come in and discuss what does that look like, and using different pronouns and giving storytelling behind different pronouns allowed for a safe space for our employees to ask questions and be curious, for someone who invited them to ask questions and feel like this is a chance not only during storytelling, but also an educational moment for them to learn and be curious. And that has worked really well, instead of constantly having our people operations team direct the education, but inviting individuals in from the community to teach us has been really helpful. We had an individual come and speak during Neurodivergent Awareness Month, and they spoke a great deal about what does inclusive communication look like? What were some of the barriers and obstacles that they encountered in terms of communication, be able to work effectively? And for our individuals, it created some aha moments. We saw the Zoom chat kind of light up as people started asking a lot of questions and correlating and making connections of, oh, we have some missteps we're doing in terms of setting up the environment for people to be successful. And we also made that connection of recognizing through exit interviews where individuals left because they didn't feel like we had set up the environment correctly. And that allowed us to take a step back and think, what do we want to do better? What do we want to make certain we are successful in terms of that environment, that greater sense of belonging for individuals? And that allowed some partnership with the diversity movement to think about, how do we run our meetings? How do we communicate on Slack? Because we do it so heavily. How can we acknowledge that there are individuals who are neurodivergent, and how can we make certain that we are doing that work to set them up for success, and also being cognizant as organizations that it is a value add to us. We don't want individuals to leave because they don't feel like we see them and that we are being mindful of them. So that created the inclusive communication guide that we're so excited. That was such an amazing partnership with the diversity movement. And our DEI committee is excited to see the work and to have that feedback really resonate. We opened up the guide within the organization just to gain feedback from individuals who are neurodivergent. And what was really nice to see in the comments was someone to say, I finally feel seen, and I feel like you care about me. That put a smile on our face of, okay, we're doing that work. We still have to implement it. Certainly, it takes time to change our behavior and recognize what we need to do in terms of how we run our meetings and how we're communicating to get better. But to take a step back and look at how we can build this and be even more intentional on the journey is something that we're committed to. And we want individuals to feel like they're here, we hired you, we care about you, we want you to stay. We don't want to find out as you're leaving that there are areas that we could have done better. So we take that as a constant growth opportunity for ourselves, that this is work that is continual. There's not going to be an end. It's okay. It's constantly getting better and creating a better environment as we learn. We're doing our best, and we can always do better through learning and education.
So that's a really
sorry, I just want to interrupt for 1 second. Because Dana, one of the things, I mean, I love that. That's such a great example, and what you're talking about in terms of a growth mindset, et cetera, is critical. Like, if we have to give each other the grace of figuring out, like, we're all trying to figure this out, and if we assume positive intent, the world would be a lot better place, right? So it's not a zero-sum game at all. But I want to just point out that instinctively, when we first came on, I think we all realized at the same time that we didn't have our pronouns in our name. And I feel like we all changed it at the same time. And what's fascinating to me, I don't believe that would have happened 3 years ago or even 2 years ago. So it's just, it is, this transformation is happening. It's happening sort of as we live it right before our eyes. So I just wanted to note that.
No, I appreciate you noting. I mean, I think it's also the individuals we meet, because we have our specific perspective. We're walking a specific journey, but as we meet other individuals, we recognize, what does it look like from their eyes?
Yeah.
What does it look like in terms of how they feel, how they show up? What could I do better? What can I make easier? Instead of thinking that assumption of, oh, okay, why do I need the pronouns there? But hearing someone else's experience and the blockers allows us to give more grace and understanding and empathy to that person.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things that, as we back to the customer first mindset, what can I do to make sure that I make life easier for the folks that I'm trying to connect to, so that I can help them engage in the most powerful way. And so what are the teaching moments, if you will? What are the moments that take advantage of things that might be happening inside the organization or externally? And this idea of doing moment marketing. And so, Bob, you kind of did moment marketing just there to take that moment that we had and draw attention to it, and to use that as a way to create an opportunity to educate, but also communicate so that change could occur. And it's those micro moments that are really important, and that requires us to be observant, that requires us to listen in a different way, so that we can think about how do we engage the organization and individuals that we come across in a way that's going to create an opportunity to engage with them. Yeah. And so I know you've done a lot of thinking on that idea of moment-based marketing and how we can use that to create momentum. And that's one of the reasons that I think organizations don't make the change they want to make, is because they're looking for this big sweeping change to occur. Like we manage almost any project inside an organization that has a beginning and an end. Yeah. This doesn't operate like this. Yeah. And so how do we take those moments and take advantage of them and notice what they are, and then use those to create change from your point?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the early days of technology marketing and trying to create a groundswell for certain approaches to things, ultimately everyone's doing transformation in some way, shape, or form. But the way that they always used to talk about it, I think it was the Heath brothers, so you got to celebrate the bright spots, right? And it sounds cheesy, but you can't have momentum without celebrating those moments. And celebrating the moments also means, I think you used the word maybe acknowledging the moments, because not every moment is going to be cause for celebration. Right. And so everybody talks about you don't learn from a place of comfort, you learn from a place of discomfort. So there are moments, big and small. And what's fascinating is there's an organization called Reagan's Communications, and they did a survey. And we talked about the say-do gap. There's also a perception gap, because leaders think they have more alignment than the people they lead. Right. So I think it's I have it written down here. So 70% of leaders think they have total organizational alignment, basically, paraphrasing. And about 40% of employees think they would live and work in an aligned organization. I actually think that's pretty high. But that gap, the only way to fill that gap is through almost like painful repetition. And I even know, as a leader, like I think, well, surely I've said that enough times. And then you do your pulse surveys, Dana, or you're like, what? People still aren't feeling that? Okay, I gotta repeat it. So Kurt, you mentioned earlier the importance of setting the context in terms of your mission and your values and your behaviors. So that is the starting point. That is the context in which the story happens. And you have to then find those moments so that everything that you do, every action you take, every communication about that action you took is in the context of where you want to go as an organization. What is our vision? What is our mission? And how those things reflect, reinforce the values and the behaviors. And I think that, as leaders, if you set that context, like this is the pond in which we're swimming, you set that context, you constantly have to come back and you have to ask yourself, with regard to the actions you're taking, is there alignment between this action I'm taking and the vision, the values, and the mission and the behaviors? And if there is an alignment, then you have a decision to make. All right, I'm going to do it. Or do I need to rethink those visions, the vision, the mission, the values, and the behaviors? Now, if you're constantly rethinking those things, probably you don't have what some people will talk about as a North Star. So that's going to require some work to get clear on. But assuming you do have that North Star and you have that mission, you have that vision, then it comes back to, as Dana said, we all agree, storytelling. So this thing happened. It matters because, and I think, some key questions that we have to ask ourselves and to ask our organization, it's, the 5 W's or whatever you might want to call it, but it's like, what are we doing, right? Or a statement, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? So contextually, why does this matter? How does it impact you as an employee? How will it impact our partners, our customers? And then I think that in building a community, right, and building an inclusive environment, people also need to know, what is expected of me, right? What is expected of me? So as a leader, you also need to be really clear. This is what I need from you. And this is what I'm going to do to support you. So all of these things, it's a knotted up ball of stuff that's all connected. You cannot disaggregate any of these things, but they all, if you were to unball that ball of yarn, it will take you to that thing that you're trying to get to, which is that destination of all of those outcomes that we talked about at the beginning. If we do those things, this will happen. And that is, frankly, any good story, whether it's a story you're trying to tell partners or customers or employees, any good story is going to have tension. And from that tension comes growth. And any good story is about the protagonist or the hero of the story wanting to get somewhere, some kind of transformation. And there's always, I've got Yoda here over my left, but there's always a mentor or a coach, or some people call it the magician, who helps people overcome the obstacles. And so as leaders in HR, as leaders in comms, that's kind of what I think our job is to help people realize, be real about what the obstacles are and how we're going to overcome them together, and to celebrate every single moment along the way and mark it like we did earlier. This is what's happening right now. Let's acknowledge what's happening and have a real conversation about it. And that's hard to do, but it's essential.
Absolutely. And that's one of the challenges in most organizations, is giving space to have a real conversation.
Yeah.
And that's increasingly difficult based on what's going on in the world. Being in a hybrid or remote environment, it's difficult to have the conversation walking down the hall if you're not together in the same space. And so being able to set aside time to have those conversations is important.
Yeah.
And
to that point, Kurt, sorry to interrupt, but one of the words that we use a lot, and I don't know that we do it flawlessly, but it's just intention. It's like every decision we make is it connected to the values, behaviors, etc. But how do we intentionally, and people will make up their own stories. Like, we know this. Like, we love stories so much, we'll spend all day making them up in our heads. So as leaders, we have to create a clear narrative that's grounded in proof and grounded in accountability, right? Or people will create a narrative that most times is going to be grounded in anxiety and fear, etc., because of the world we're living in, which is sadly every day is a new assault on our humanity, our shared humanity, it seems like. So yeah, people are anxious and they're full of fear. And the only way to counter fear is, well, you could argue it's love or it's hope, but the reality is, in a pragmatic way, it's telling a story that is about that destination that we're trying to get to. Sorry to interrupt.
Right. Thanks for fully expressing that point. In the power of stories and setting aside time to be able to do that in the right way. And so I'm going to wade into this. I'm looking at the Q&A here. And there's one comment that talks about, and we'll just jump straight into this one. Can we please challenge the notion of assume positive intent? It does not get applied equally or equitably. White people get the benefit of the doubt. Black and brown people do not. Impact is what's important regardless of intent. And so I wanted to get your reaction to that. It's more of a statement than a question. But that's a pretty, I've got thoughts, but I want to hear what you both think about that one, and then we'll cover some of the other ones.
Well, since I made the comment, I'll take the first attempt. So I would say I 100% agree with the assertion that we all live and work in a system that is a racist system. It's an inequitable system. You could argue it's a misogynist system. So the systems that we've all come out of and where we are today are 100%, I think we have to acknowledge, grounded in inequity, and you could argue injustice. But we're in a world where we have to be able to hold sometimes two competing ideas at the same time. So we can acknowledge that is true, and also acknowledge that most human beings, or if we give people the benefit of the doubt that where they're coming from is positive, then that opens up the space for communication versus immediately going to conflict. So that's what I talk about, assuming positive intent, because whoever wrote that question, you're 100% right. Impact versus intent every day. Like, how many times, if I had $1 for every time I said, well, my intent was, the impact I had was, and I'm going to revisit that. And I appreciate you pointing it out for me. But the key is to find those spaces where we can have the conversations. And I believe a starting point for that is to assume positive intent, acknowledging fully that the systems that we're trying to shift and change are inherently broken, racist, flawed. And we get, I don't know how much more evidence we need of that, because we see it every day. As a white, cisgender, middle-aged guy who lives a life of privilege, I'm fully aware of it, and try to check myself as much as I can.
Thanks for sharing that, Bob. I don't have a whole lot to add to your answer, other than there's a title of a book that I think about a lot. It's called Moral Man and Moral Society. And so a lot of times in our systems are set up in a certain way, but if we're going to create change across those systems, then the individual conversations that we have, hopefully in those individual discussions, we can create change. And so when we're entering into dialogue with someone, it's important to have that kind of thought process. Also knowing that there are biases and other things that people have based on backgrounds, based on status, based on privilege, but the change has to happen at the individual levels. And so what are the things that we can do on an individual basis to hopefully move things forward? So want to move on to the next couple of questions. Dana, this one is primarily for you. What's the best way about finding the speakers? How have you located the speakers that you found to talk about certain topics and create a safe space for folks to be curious in those dialogues that you've had?
Yeah, I have to give a lot of credit to our people experience manager who has a cultural anthropology background, is very connected in the Durham community. So when we have these conversations and I chat with Laura about what speakers can we bring in who have that knowledge, that history, and because Spreely's headquartered in Durham, we always want to bring in speakers connected to the community. So my suggestion would be, when you're looking at the space that you're existing in or your company's headquartered in, think about maybe the individuals that you connect with within the community. Like, we do a lot of our purchases with restaurants in the community, local restaurants with local vendors who are bringing in our snacks. So we're having some conversations and communication. So we get to know these individuals. We get to hear a little bit more about their experiences. And that's kind of cemented how we brought people in. We haven't just solely always thought of maybe a nonprofit or an organization, but an individual who maybe has that experience or that background, represents part of that community, and ask them if they'd be interested in sharing a little bit more about their life experience. And so we'll have those conversations and kind of give some coaching around what we'd like to talk about, some key points, and then we'll kind of curate that. And so we've learned along the way where that works, maybe where that doesn't, but that's where I would start is like, who are you working with within the community, and where can you bring that individual in to share a little bit more about their background and context? It allows for your organization as well to start thinking differently outside of what we do day to day, especially in tech, but what's going on in terms of the people around us.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful. And there's a question I don't think we're going to have a chance to really get to the meat of it, but who's mentored us in the work? So if you could spend 30 seconds just thinking about how you've approached the work, who's been helpful to you, and then we'll push it over to Andrea to close us. So Bob, you want to start?
Oh boy. Wow, what a great question. I don't know that I've had a specific mentor in this work. I think it's more like folks who've shifted my thinking about leadership would be some of the standard answers, like folks like Simon Sinek and Brene Brown. And, that's been an evolution over time. So, and of course, I love the work that we do with Kurt and his team at the Diversity Movement. So there's a plug for you, Kurt. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Bob.
For me, that had my roots. I graduated from Salem College, a historically women's college. And for me, the first person was the president of the college. She took me under her wing and taught me a little bit more about how she did fundraising. I got to see through working closely with her how she worked as a female leader. And I've had a lot of leaders along the way, men and women, who've taught me a great deal in terms of leadership presence, influence, diplomacy, and just how to create psychological safety. So a number of different leaders.
For me, I was fortunate to be part of the Black Employee Network at Procter & Gamble early in my career. And that just opened my eyes to lots of different possibilities. And as I think about today, it's most of the folks that I come in contact with when I do the work in my teammates at the Diversity Movement. I think it's important to have a personal advisory board, if you will, that you can work with both internally and externally to help you make progress. And the last part of the question is, how do you do it in a remote environment? One leader that I've worked with that had a really powerful way to do this is to have what he called walk and talks. So whether that's calling somebody on the phone and saying, I'm going to call this person today to have a conversation with them, or do it on Zoom, or do it the right way, but it does require intentionality, as you pointed out before, Bob. So there's much more ground I'd love to cover. But I want to thank both you, Bob and Dana, for spending some time this morning to walk through this. And I want to pass the baton over to Andrea to close us out.
Well, that was very impactful. I know everyone on the call was able to take away some great thoughts and things that they would like to put in action. I know I took several notes. And one I really love is one from Dana. We can always do better through learning and education, and appreciating that this is a process. 45 minutes of this discussion was not near long enough, but hopefully gave people some tidbits and want to learn more. I really thank all of you for your time this morning, and know NC Tech is really blessed to have some great partners that we work with, and are always appreciative of you sharing your thoughts with fellow members as they work through some of these difficult conversations that need to be had to move forward. For those that do want to take this to the next level, NC Tech is an official partner with the diversity movement on their educational programming and training content, which there's some amazing things on there. There's a free library card that you can have access to some of their materials for free for 30 days, which is awesome. I will share those resources out in the email follow-up to this session with some links. We have a resource page specific to NC Tech. I will also include some information on our next Focus on Talent session, which is a great tie-in to this one about how to develop diverse tech talent. Hope you'll join us for that session. And again, the resources through the diversity movement, we're lucky to have them here in North Carolina, but they do work all over the country. And NC Tech members also get a discount on some of those educational programming. So it's a nice partnership and a give back to fellow members. So I want to thank everyone for participating today, and we'll look forward to further conversations and celebrating those positive moments and acknowledging progress along the way. So thank you all for being with us this morning. We appreciate it.